with great pleasure, Paul. Paul's going to be speaking on reflections of Such Was Life.
Well, thank you. Well, I think we should refer to me as the light entertainment branch of today's festivities because I am not a historian.
Keep it close to your mouth, Paul.
No.
In fact, well, I'm going to go down here. If I can't hear you, I'm kneeling out.
Is it working now? Well, I did warn you. I'm not a historian, unlike all of you. In fact, film producers like me can best be likened to two different kinds of birds. One is a magpie. I see bright, shiny things, pick them up, take them home, and have no idea what they are. But if people like you give me the words, then I become a great parrot, and I can say the words. So the Such Was Life project was based on the idea I had about 4 or 5 years ago that you are doing great work collecting and preserving history. But in so many cases, that history isn't getting told outside our circles.
Yeah.
People like me go to the museums, but a lot of people, like some of my kids unfortunately, don't. So I conceived of an idea that we would go and work with the local community and pick artifacts in individual museums and tell the story behind those artifacts. Now, by nature, I'm a drama producer, not a documentary producer. So I'm always looking for characters and I'm looking for stories. And the result was that we ended up doing a trial project, and ironically, perhaps, or the stars were aligned, it actually started here in Dongra. And so you can blame Trish, Graham, and Bruce for everything. Including any historical inaccuracies of the film. Because it's their fault. And we were very lucky to start in Dongra, actually, because in all seriousness, they were exactly the kind of thing that we needed to launch this project. This project was started off with being 5 films in the Midwest. We've now done 11 more films in the Goldfields and the Southwest. I'm off to Carnarvon this afternoon because we still have 1 film to finish in Carnarvon. And I have to say, you know, you can tell from my accent I wasn't born here, but I have lived here for 50 years. And why I ever agreed that in with the Goldfields and the Southwest we should do a film in Carnarvon is beyond my understanding. But it was my fault. But so off to Carnarvon, we're doing the final film of Such Was Life 2 there. Now, I'm not going to show you a lot of film today because all the films are available. First of all, they're on the Wonderland website, and the WA Museum backed these films because they wanted to, on Wonderland, promote the regional and community museums, as most of you would already know. So these films were designed to promote. And they were also designed to assist with tourism, we hope. And I'll add to that a bit later on. So we ended up doing these films as a way of telling stories, but always looking for stories that weren't obvious. So in Geraldton, for example, we didn't do the Batavia. The Batavia is there. It's a huge exhibit. People know about the Batavia. Instead, I saw a row of medals under a photograph of an Indigenous soldier named Jim Joseph. And that led to a story about Indigenous servicemen in World Wars I, II, and Vietnam. And that was made possible because, as it turned out, the grandson of Jim Joseph had made contact with the museum recently, and we were able to be put in contact and we got to interview him. So it becomes very personal. The idea is that we do not interview Perth academics. The idea is all the interviewees are family members or people connected with the local community. It's meant to be your story, not my story. And I mean that sincerely. So every single subject in these films today has been picked by the community. We have developed it with the community. Community members have script approval. They view the final edits. Some of them even make valuable comments. And in fact, sometimes things go a little bit, it's an evolutionary process. Again, with Dongra in mind, and given the bright shiny thing I mentioned, I saw this, they have a display of 4 photographers who photographed Dongra, and I was quite interested in that. And there was one woman who was featured in the display. And we thought, woman, Dongra, photographer, what could possibly go wrong? What went wrong was that Trish rang me up some weeks later and said, actually, we only have 2 photographs by her, one of which we think was taken by her husband. And so this 6 or 7 minute long film we've been planning is going down the slope. But she said, but I found these wonderful photographs by William Wilton. And I went, okay, who's William Wilton? Well, he was a railway ganger, and he took these wonderfully evocative films. At the time when, all of you know, photographers were taking photographs of the city councillors or the visiting politicians, whatever. He was photographing ordinary men and women, working people, on the railway, in the fields, whatever. And they're a remarkable series of photographs, the equivalent of what Bert Saw was doing down in Denmark, for example. And we turned the whole film around, and it becomes largely about William Wilton, because it was exciting, visually exciting, and different. And so each of these films has also evolved. We don't start off with a blueprint that says, we're going to do this. We start off with a sketch that says, that'd be nice, and then it changes. Out in the Goldfields, I was planning to do 1 film about water. What happened was that in Goldfields, everybody talks about water. And my wife grew up in the Goldfields. I knew a bit about water. But we ended up doing 2 films about water because it was such an important topic to that community. And although I read a lot of history, I'm not a historian, but things like the largest typhoid epidemic in Australian history was in the Goldfields was something I did not know. In fact, all of you know all kinds of stories that people like me don't know. So the intention of Such Was Life was to help take some of those stories out to a wider audience. And then in so doing, hopefully, encourage them, the viewers, to explore more. To explore within your museums, to explore online, to just plain explore. So what we were always trying to do with these films too, is make them entertaining. Because, let's face it, history to some people can be really dull. So when I talked to Gary in Greenough about what film did we do in Greenough, and he said Mary Farrelly, and I went, who? And he explained who Mary Farrelly was, most of you know the story, and this remarkable woman who was doing these remarkable things, but amongst other things, was believing that wheat was the cure-all for everything, and you could live to be 150 years if you ate a wheat diet. So we turned part of the program into the Mary Farrelly Cooking Show. And Gary got to eat wheat sausages from her recipe and wheat coffee from her recipe. Gary's face when he tasted the wheat coffee was remarkable to behold. And needless to say, made it to the final film. Now, perhaps the best way of introducing it, though, is if we show you the trailer that we made based on the first 5 films shot in the Midwest, and that will explain something of what we've been trying to do.
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are advised that this film contains images of people who have passed.
The community and regional museums of Western Australia's Midwest contain artefacts that reflect and record our history. The Western Australian Museum commissions Sandpiper Entertainment, working directly with the local museums to tell the stories about the people behind selected exhibits. The result is Such Was Life, a unique initiative to ignite curiosity, inform and entertain, as well as to promote the museums and collections of the region.
A Dongra store account book opens the door into the Sikh community 100 years ago. and the Sikh wrestlers who toured the state.
The medals of World War II veteran Jim Joseph lead us to consider how Indigenous servicemen and women were treated when they returned home.
We tell you how to cook wheat sausages and the story of Mary and passionate advocate for women and children's rights.
An original ticket of leave introduces us to Welsh cabbage thief, murderer and transported convict Benjamin Taffy Jones.
Oh, you're a funny man.
And we visit Dongara through the lenses of photographers from the 1880s to the 1930s, and the remarkable photos taken by railway worker William Wilton.
The Such Was Life documentaries are part of the stories and treasures from regional Western Australia that you will discover on the new Wonderland website.
So that was based on the first. That was based on the first 5 films, and as I say, since then we've been to the Goldfields, we've been to the Southwest, and I leave for Karratha next week. All I can say is that I've had a ball doing these films. I have to tell you that they take about as much energy as a feature film, each of them. And working with the local communities, working with people like yourselves, working with Trish and Graham and Bruce here, Gary and Greenough, Malcolm down in Albany, Rosie and Kate, Rosie in Kalgoorlie, Cato up in Leonora, Vic in Coolgardie, are only examples of the huge number of people who contributed to each of these films. And what I think they've succeeded in doing, and it's their films, not mine, is telling the story to a wider audience. So not only are these films on Wonderland, and you can see them there, but they're also being broadcast nationally on SBS. And if you...
Sorry, Paul. Your microphone, please. They can't hear you, and you're interesting. If you do it properly, I'll get off your phone.
You realize, of course, that in my business, I have people who do this shit. I was once asked by a DOP on one of our shoots if I would get him 2 Alexa cameras, which were brand new at the time. And I said, sure. And I turned to the production manager and said, get him 2 Alexa cameras. And she said, what's an Alexa camera? I said, I don't know. I said, my job is not to tell him what camera to use. My job is to fire him if he picks the wrong one. So needless to say, what we need here is a boom swinger and a sound recorder for me to do this properly. Anyway, the interesting thing about this is that it did all start here, and what you've seen up here are some of the examples of how this came about. For example, that store account book was a classic case of me seeing a bright, shiny thing. I passed by this glass case where Dongra got it on display, and I said, I saw it was written in a language I didn't understand. And I said, what's that? Oh, said Bruce, or Graham, or Trish. That's the store account book of Roshan Singh. And I said, Sikhs in Dongra 100 years ago? He said, oh yes, and they proceeded to tell me the story, which I will not recount in its completion here. You can watch the film instead. About the Sikh shopkeepers and how they married into the community here, and how Dirty Dongra became the name for Dongra because of the marriages between Sikhs and European women. And our researcher, Flora, a remarkable woman, turned up the story about the wrestlers, one of whom went on to be world champion. And that led us, thanks to Taran here, into that whole world. And when we talk about tourism, to cut this long story short, we made the film thanks to Dongra and thanks to the Sikh Association and Taran. And the result of all that was that Dongra knew about the Sikhs that were here, but didn't know about the wrestlers. The Sikh Association knew that there had been Sikhs in Dongra, but it's fair to say didn't have the complete story. And therefore, a year after the film was made, over 200 Sikhs hired buses and went from Perth to spend the weekend here in Dongra to find out more about their community. Now, I'd like to think that we'll be able to replicate that in other towns and other communities where we've awakened interest and where people feel compelled to try and find out more. And that's the purpose of the films. So my thanks to all of you, because I'm having a ball. And I've discovered things about this state that after being here all these years and doing projects based on stories of this state, I had no idea. And it is the stories that are buried in our communities that I think we need to tell. Now, you'll allow me to say this. I believe that it's simply not enough that you and people like me collect the stories, collect the artifacts. We need to tell the stories. And I would say that the museum, the WA Museum, are to be thanked and congratulated for having taken this to the level they have, where these films are being broadcast nationally, where they're on the websites, where hopefully they're attracting interest. But the danger is always that we're preaching to the converted. And so I would simply advocate social media, making your own films. These are not expensive to do. These days you can do it on your own phone. I was astounded that I took some shots on my phone for one of the films. That was, if you'll believe me, an iPhone 7. And it met broadcast standard. Now I spent 30 years of my professional life worrying about whether or not our finished product was going to reach broadcast standard, which was very tight. An iPhone 7 reaches broadcast standard. So you can make your own films, you can tell your own stories, you can post them on social media, you can get the stories out there because you have in your collections marvelous things and you also have marvelous stories and marvelous people. Now with that, at the danger of turning this morning into the Bruce show, I also want to play one thing that that we included at the end of one of the films. And actually it was the Sikh film. Because Bruce wrote me an email once. He said basically it was important that we tell these stories because we need to tell stories about our communities and so on and so forth. I said, you just scripted the epilogue and we're now shooting you doing that. So, with no further ado, here's Bruce.
Does it have a soundtrack?
There's the soundtrack.
Vibrant migrant communities like the Sikhs were here in Western Australia from the 1880s and even earlier until the present day. We bought their goods, their food, their fabrics, we took full advantage of their store credit, and yet we just didn't include them in our local histories. A veil has been drawn over those histories. Now it's time for the Grace and Sojan Singhs and the Rua Singhs to be written back into our histories to make a fuller and more inclusive history for all of us in every local area.
Do you have any questions or do you want me to ramble on? We can talk later. Let's talk. We'll talk.
Right down the back there first. We'll start down there because I just like to see Karen race on there. Oh, I'm going to pay for this story. Feed her at lunchtime.
Seriously, I think you're amazing. You are just everything that I worship in telling stories. The question I have for you is that we tell people, I make mini docos on my iPhone 16 and it's about having the sound. And one of the things that I have done is I've created a video on how to do it, but I only have this much connection. Would you consider making a video for the museums to show people how simple it is to put up a phone and just start talking? Because I think that is really something that would enhance people to do the stories. And I've stalked you on phone, I've already followed you.
Well, I don't need the mic, thanks, Karen. Save yourself. Perhaps you missed the anecdote about the cameras, because I'm technically illiterate. But I think it's a very good idea, I must say, I really do. And I think that the museum would consider such a thing. I mean, the museum have supported all these films. I mean, these films wouldn't exist without the WA Museum, and without, in particular, Jess Machen and Alec Cole, their support for these films.
Alec Cole?
Yep.
Yeah. You know what? He was at this level. You just inched past him.
Don't tell Alec.
Paul, we've got a question down here for you now.
Oh, thank you, Bruce, for your presentation. Very interesting.
That's Paul, that's Bruce over there. It's hard to, easy to be confused because he was on
Pardon?
top of it. Doesn't matter.
Oh, sorry, Paul.
I answer to the name idiot as
I
well.
thought you were the Bruce show. Paul, sorry, Paul. Paul, who has financed all the films or videos that you have made? Are they by your company? Because everything comes down to money these days. And I think it's really wonderful, the stories that you're bringing out. And I'd love to see you do a story on probably the most famous woman from this region that no one knows much about, and that's Edith Cowan. And her father was hanged and all these horrible things. But who finances the films?
Well, in the case of these films, they're all financed by the WA Museum. In the case of the earlier dramas, well, you need pages of lists to go through. Broadcasters help finance them. The state government, through Screen West, helps finance them. What used to be called, still now called Screen Australia, helps finance. Overseas buyers finance. So on the big drama projects which I've done, you will end up with 5 or 6 or 10 different groups of investors or institutions being involved. And so it's a jigsaw puzzle. It's a jigsaw puzzle. This, by comparison, was an easy jigsaw. It was one piece. It was called the WA Museum. Yes, sir.
The film Shame,
Yes.
I used a lot to teach late teenagers a lot about life. It was great. They loved it.
Yeah.
No, Shame is one that I'm particularly proud of. I should correct one thing. I didn't write it. I can take credit for having seen the script and saying we have to make this film.
One up here for Matthew.
I just want to thank you very much for, obviously you've gone out of your normal filmmaking shows into this, so thank you very much for doing this for all the museums. And also I want to congratulate you on your career, and I'm a fan of Ship to Shore, and I grew up watching Ship to Shore, and The Gift was actually filmed in the workshops in Midland. Yes. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. In fact,
Brooks said that you can have as many questions as you like.
well, can I just add one thing about Ship to Shore, which was that when my kids were going through university, and they said their name, if one more person whistled the Ship to Shore's theme song, they were getting fucked.
I knew we should have shut him down earlier.
Any more questions? Yes, of course you can.
No, you had your chance for all your questions over many years.
I just want to reiterate what Matt said. When Paul came to us with this idea, and it took a couple of years of talking about it, and it sounded really crazy. We thought, wow, that sounds fantastic, but who's ever going to fund that? And I just admire your persistence in having this dream of what you can do in telling great stories. And Paul just kept chipping away, and look what he's done. It's just amazing.
Well, I think it's fair to say that those people I mentioned, like Malcolm, like Rosie, like Trish, I also drove them crazy for several years. I mean, we would go back and forth needing this fact or that photograph or that contact or whatever. Would they please look at this edit? And we drove them crazy. But we also had remarkable local support. I mean, for example, down in Albany, the shanty
Come
man.
on, sorry.
She just, look. Maybe you couldn't hear. Down in Albany, the shantymen put on a bit of a show for us to introduce the story about whaling in Nebayan. The Waifs gave us the right to use their song Bridal Train because it was written about their grandmother and grandfather who were married while the American fleet, submarine fleet, was in Albany for 6 months. Now, until I met Malcolm, for example, I knew a bit about the American fleet. By the way, I'm originally Canadian. Can we just get that out? Before anybody makes a mistake. And I knew about the American fleet. In fact, we'd been writing a feature film about a romance with an American sailor, a black American sailor and an Australian woman, and so on and so forth. So I thought I knew the subject. I did not know that the entire American submarine fleet and tenders had decamped to Albany for 6 months during World War II. And Malcolm was one of those people who told us this story because it all started, again, with that artifact, that incongruous artifact in the museum. And in this case, it was an American football. And you go, what is an American football doing in the Albany Museum? Well, the answer's in the film, so you can watch it. But in each case, what we're always looking for, and this applies should we be working together on any future films, and please lobby the WA Museum because I love doing them, and my only regret is that we can't do all of them. I mean, there are great stories in every single community museum. So all we're able to do is do a kind of like a quick sample and hope that that gets more underway. But boy, would I love to do more. Because there are so many great stories, and they're there to be told. And that hopefully, as I say, they also have a commercial benefit in terms of encouraging visitors and tourists, which is what we're all aiming for. So I would just say thank all of you for all of your hard work, and I'm glad that I've been able to play a small part in getting the stories out there. Thank you.